finally getting back to me, my art. All I want to do is art. And the other thing is that I love stories. So like to me, art is in everything. Your art is your voice, your speaking, your connection. You can feel everyone's energy. That's your art. It's the art of living to me. So art and hustle to me is the art of living and art of it and everything.
I hope that you cut that piece right there and make it your intro and your outro, because that was dope.
Oh, so nice to
meet you. I mean, welcome to the Art and Hustle Gallery of Conversations. I'm so excited to have you here. I ran across your page on Instagram and immediately I just kept watching it again and again. And I was like, wow, it just resonated so much to me that I was like, this is amazing. And let me just reach out to you and see, maybe you want to chat with me and talk to me on my podcast. So welcome. And can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and your background?
Yes. It's funny because every time somebody asks me to introduce myself, I'm at a little bit at a loss for words, because in the last 10 years, that description has changed so dramatically that it just always feels a little odd to have to put any kind of labels, because it almost feels limiting. But of course, the purposes
tell me what it was before and how it changed to now. I'd love to find out like the process of how it changed for you too.
Yes, well, before my kind of big awakening and shift in my life and the way I perceive life, I was your typical woman of a certain age. I was a mother, I was a wife, I was, I was Russian and French and American. These are the cultures in which I've lived, and just sort of that was. And I guess also being a woman, I felt that I needed to introduce myself as a mother first. It just was like, that's my most important role. And I was so fed up at some point from being a mother of or a wife of that. And I guess all the other factors, just everything brought me to a particular crisis in life, or a series of crises, where I felt that those definitions just was not working for me anymore.
Well,
I felt
exactly. That's how I felt, and that's why I loved your post, and I started reading more of it. So I completely resonate with like what you're saying, because I went through the same crisis also.
And and it's funny because now that I'm studying the meaning of crisis in life, among other things, now I know that a crisis always comes to kind of liberate us from our identities. And that's what happened to me. I really was sort of invited, let's say, to understand, well, what are my values and who am I, and understand that I'm so much more than what I've been labeling myself by, and that ultimately what I'm finding today, to collapse that timeline a little bit, is that I can be all those identities, which are still my identities. I'm still a wife of somebody, and I'm still a mother of somebody, etc. But it doesn't have to limit me anymore. That's the sort of the big shift that happened in my life, is that I can be all those, but they're now my roles, or one of many roles, rather than my identity or who I am.
Yes.
So that kind of allows me much more freedom in the way I move through life now. And I allow myself more things and more exploration and more a larger range of feelings, because I'm so much bigger than just these roles that I step in and out of as I need,
And when did you have that crisis and realize the shift that you were needing to do?
Yeah, I think when I started really noticing, it was around 2013, but it started before. I think it started maybe closer to 2010 or so, maybe even earlier, where I suddenly started feeling not well, like something was, I wasn't happy. And and it was a very perplexing moment because as being a good girl, I always tried to do everything I was told.
Yes.
So I did, I had the good grades, I got a good job, and then I did get married by a certain age. And then, with some roundabout twists, I did have my children, and I was sort of doing everything that.
Yes, like the checklist.
I totally did the checklist, totally did the checklist down to certain minute details. And yet that satisfaction, that fulfillment, that sense of joy that I was promised, I'm saying it in quotes, that wasn't forthcoming.
To me, I did the checklist too, and then I'm like, okay, I went to college, I should be happy. Get married, I should be happy. Have kids, I should be happy. Have the house and the career, I should be happy. And then you realize, like, the same funny thing is, like, 2013 was when my shift happened as well, which is ironic too. It's when my mom had passed away. So that catalyst, so her death was my rebirth.
Yeah.
Because she never had that voice to be able to express herself, to be able to be who she really was and get out of an unhappy marriage. And so I was like, you know what? I can't die unhappy like her. And I was kind of turning into her. Like, I started looking like her. I was gaining weight like her. And I was like, all the stress I would hold in my neck and shoulders, and I would slouch over like her too. And I was like, oh my God, like, I just can't keep doing this. Like, I have to change, and I have to shift. And I had this voice that kept telling me, like, you have to get back to your art. Like, I've always been an artist as a kid, painting, drawing, like any type of art I would be doing. And this voice just kept telling me, you need to get back to your art. You need to do art, and you need to do some big art. And just kept telling me. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to go to the store and buy like a whole bunch of canvases. And before, I used to create to make something out of something, like even look at something and, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to draw this. But finally, I was able to just do my art out of like intuition, out of what I was feeling. And then the canvases would speak to me, of like, my feelings would speak to me, and I would just do art just for the sake of art. And it was so liberating, and finally started finding my voice also in life and also in my art.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, what you mentioned by, being guided from within, that's a lot of my process as well, because until I started allowing myself to self-express, my life was very focused on the outside and the sort of response or in reaction to the outside, triggers or experiences. Whereas as I redefine, who I am and what's important for me, it's a much more of an inside out kind of living.
Yes, exactly. Like, until I was like, okay, I am tired of being like the nice girl. I'm tired of being like the role of like the mother, just a mother, and just like doing all of these things that I have to do. I was just feeling that role of that traditional role of like, the good Asian, wife and, mother. And I was like, this is not me fully. Like, I'm not. And then my husband wasn't fully allowing me the freedom to express who I was. So I felt limited in that aspect too. So I realized I had to get a divorce. So then that process started, like when my mom passed away, and then I had to get a divorce. And I realized like I was kind of falling into the same trap of my mom, of picking someone who was super dominant, person that was like controlling also at times too, even though you might not think so. So I was like, oh my God, like I'm doing all the things my mom did.
That's really funny that you say that, because I've written a lot about that as well, that, as a young woman, I remember my sister and I would always laugh how, oh my God, like whatever I do, I'm not going to be my mom. And then I became one. You
don't realize, but unconsciously, those psychological paths that you just emulate as a kid, you just naturally do it anyway.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Also, it's part of what I'm exploring, the way the dysfunction is passed on from generation to generation, because our conditioning is formed by these dynamics that we observe in the family of our origins. So to break out of that, it's such an invisible, insidious, structure that to break out of it really takes a lot of awareness and courage to do things differently.
Yeah, and to really get uncomfortable and do all the things that are uncomfortable, because most of the people are living just sleepwalking through life and unconscious through it, and just normally just doing what the things that society says we have to do. And then you don't realize, one day you wake up and you're like, oh my God, like what's happening here? That when I text you, I was like, oh, where are you? You're in France, right? And I was like, oh, I'm in Staten Island. And you told me that your parents used to live in Staten Island. So it's such a small world. So tell us, where were you born also? And like, how was your childhood?
Yeah. So I was born in the Soviet Union, actually. I was born in Minsk, Belarusia, which was part of the Soviet Union. And when I was 15, my family moved to the United States. So from 15, I was living in the States. And at some point when I went away to school, my parents actually lived in Staten Island years. Then they moved away from there. But there was a chunk of my life, when I lived in Manhattan and I would travel to see my parents in Staten Island. So that was just a fun coincidence.
It's so funny.
But then when I got married, because my husband was raised in France, life kind of brought me to this part of the world, and we started spending more time here until we finally settled down.
And how was your childhood and your parents? Like, how was your relationship with them?
Oh yeah, well, that I feel like my childhood really set me up with enough wounding to give me a lot of work to then overcome it, because having been born in the Soviet Union in the 60s, it was, very much very hierarchical, very totalitarian, very censored life. My father was actually a political activist, ex-military man and political activist. So he was, scrutinized, and we, like our apartment was bugged, and often, like among my childhood memories were when, my parents would have some friends come over for dinner, they would write some things on paper rather than speak, because that's how I was raised. Yeah?
Really?
Or my father and I would go for a walk, and like a man from KGB would come up and say, sorry, you can't go, you can't really go out today because, I don't know, there was something happening in town, some kind of official mission. And, they didn't want my father who was an activist to disrupt anything. So
oh my God, that's so fascinating.
That's part of my childhood memory. That's what formed my sense of self, that, being me is dangerous. And, I'm not safe to be me.
You're not safe. Yeah.
I'm not safe. I'm not safe to be me. I'm not safe to self-express. I'm not safe to, authority is not to be trusted, but to be feared, and, all kinds of, and then it was repeated in my family as in my father was quite abusive emotionally and physically. He was, once again, not very tolerant. So he was basically like that. What I saw outside was repeated also inside within our family. So for me to get to where I am today, speaking freely about the subjects that I find fascinating, to me, a lot of it is shadow and what it means to be a woman and a mother in 21st century. I'm very, very interested in disrupting, some of these kind of boxes into which we stuffed ourselves, being conditioned under patriarchy, and talking about the shadow and kind of inviting women to see that the biggest enemy is not the patriarchy out there. Yeah. It's the patriarchy within.
Yes.
It's the one we've absorbed through our childhood, And so it's not so much the enemy in that, that's something we need to kill or, fight. It's more like it's a self-imposed prison. It's a self-imposed limitation where, yes, we still bump against certain structures and the lawmakers and everything, like what we're going through again. But at the same time, we do have a lot more power than we give ourselves the right to exercise.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in that discourse. What can we do about the choices we make about who we are to affect society? Because I feel that society is us, is each one of us, you know?
Yes, yes. Like we have to, I realized going through my journey is that I would have this. So I mean, honestly, you're like, honestly, like a soul sister at this point, because everything you're saying is like similar to things that I've been through. Like my dad was very like, he was the one, he's like your traditional Asian man. Like there was always his rules. He was so dominant. He was physically abusive, mentally abusive, and among other abusive things that he was also. And it was always, you know, his way or the highway. You had to listen to him, everything, and you had to be the obedient good girl. And you have to, in Asian culture, you always had to get straight A's. And so me being an artist, I was the youngest of three. So they were more academic and smarter and got those A's when they really, really studied. Even if I really, really studied, I would get like a B, maybe a B plus. And so I always felt inadequate there and wasn't able to fill that role that I was supposed to, the good girl who's really good in school, the perfect Asian, you know, human being and girl. But then also like women are not respected at all in Asian culture. We're like looked down upon. The golden child is always the male, and he was the oldest. So he was, you know, he didn't have to do as much of the grunt work as we had to do, because my parents had a Chinese restaurant in Long Island when I was growing up. So we would always be the one working mostly. And they would be like, oh, Dave has to go do this. He's got to do that. You know, you guys have, so like, I used to help my dad do like all kinds of physical labor, building things, concrete, working at the restaurant. Like, so there's a lot of unpacking and from that abuse to figure out who am I when I'm not that, like, have to be that good girl. And so all of that had been unpacking since I turned 40 and since 2013. And I'm finally getting to that space where I'm able to just be me and be okay with the things that I say that come out of my mouth. Because being a good girl, you're quiet. You just listen to everybody. You just sit there and be quiet. You're seen and not heard. You just smile. And that's how I've always been. I've always been that nice girl, getting along with everybody. Never really saying the things that are going on in my head of what I think. Like if I don't agree with you, normally I would not say anything, because a good girl doesn't disagree. A good girl doesn't argue with you. And so it's funny now that I'm doing a podcast, because now I have to speak and I have to be on forefront. So how I started that also was that I was doing art, and so I like when I found my voice with my art, I started curating. I did like my art shows. I started having a solo show, and then I was meeting all of these artists in Brooklyn who were so like talented that I was like, you know what, I want to curate a show also. So I started curating shows, and then COVID happened, and then my partner before was like, don't let Artandhustle die. Like, this is something really beautiful that you have, and you've like resonated with so many people, and everybody loves the name. That don't let it die. Keep doing it. You should do a podcast. And I was like, but I'm too shy. I'm not used to doing that. I'm used to always standing in the back, supporting somebody else. He's like, no. So I thought that I would do it with him and we would talk to guests. He's like, no, this is your baby. You need to shine here. Like, it has to be you. You're the bridge between these people. You're the one who's connecting with all of these people on Instagram and talking to them. So he's like, it has to be you. So like, this is my new journey of my voice and like talking to people and like expressing myself. So, and honestly, I love it now. It's been a beautiful journey just doing this now.
I celebrate you. I mean, I also love hearing the stories of these right people, you know, coming to us at the right moment to give us that support and that boost to believe in ourselves. So I think it's beautiful that your partner was able to give you that light, you know, and sort of like reflect it back to you. That's really wonderful.
It's beautiful. And how I like to do these podcasts, like I always like love to hear about your stories, and then I like to share a story. So then it gives people a little more like comfort of like, okay, like this is just a conversation and we don't have to be like so stressed out about it, like where it's like so strict and interview questions, so people are resonating that aspect of it too that I bring.
Yeah, I love that too. I mean, it's that the opposite of perfect, right? The opposite of, we were conditioned to, because I also worked in the corporate world for a little while, and there's so much of that. You need to be perfect. You need to be
Yes.
really well prepared and all that. And
Yeah.
ever since I connected to the intuition that you mentioned, I just allow myself to flow so naturally, completely trusting that, that the right words will always come, and it's changed my life.
Amazing. So what did you do before? Like, what were some of your jobs before you started coaching?
So yeah, so as a perfect child of immigrants, in New York, I
Perfect.
yeah. So I have, I did well in school. I have an MBA from Stern School of Business in NYU. I was recruited by JP Morgan at the time. They just opened their office on Wall Street. It was early 90s, and, all kinds of privileges that came with that, because I was selected for their management training program. It was like the path, like my immigrant parents were thrilled.
Yeah.
It was like, for everyone else, it was like an incredible success, right?
Yeah,
and I kind of felt it in that I saw that how excited everybody was about what I was doing, But then when I started working, I immediately understood that there is no air to breathe for me here. Like I never even realized to what extent I was a creative person, that I was like a people person. Like I thrive also on like interesting conversations, meeting interesting people. And I remember that, I was 23, 24 at the time. I remember just like having this real like realization that, oh my God, these people are just like zombies. Like everybody there was just, you wake up very early. Most people were commuting. They would spend like an hour and a half commuting. Then they would work there, 17, 20 hours a day, because we were all young enough to pay our dues at the time they COVID. And then they would travel again back home just in time to go to sleep. They don't see their children. The wives are always nagging that they're not there. And yet, the responsibility of the mortgages and the life, it was like such an incredibly obvious rat race that I was like that's not life. That's not the life I want. There was this real realization. So what was interesting about what happened to me is I met my husband while I was working on Wall Street. He was also working for one of the financial institutions at the time. But also around that time, the Soviet Union fell. And Russia was becoming a new, a Wild West, a new territory. And so at some point we were curious enough to leave everything, and we went to Russia, Russia.
A
couple of years there, because we had the language and the culture. He is also from Russia. It's just he was raised in France. So we had the language and the culture to sort of understand, and yet we had our westernized experience of education and everything. So we worked there for a little while. I was mostly working for to support my husband's idea. And then at some point, I started realizing that once again, there was always that sense that there was something missing. There was something else that I wasn't quite connecting. But then, then children came, and because we were traveling, moving about a little bit, I stayed at home. And I felt also that I was supposed to do, because I feel like so much of what was around me, both in the family realm and in society at large, I kept on reading these articles of like these career women who by the age of 40 got scared they don't have children, left it all, never looked back, because child rearing is just such a rewarding experience. And so 3 children later, it got to the point where when they were all teenagers, 3 teenage girls, and I felt so rejected and so just not at all in that sweet, motherhood, hearts and unicorns and rainbows, situation.
Yeah.
That I just, it just, like all these elements just brought to my complete unraveling. I just felt in
Wow.
deep depression, and I just felt disconnected from everything and
Wow.
everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so for me, you know, that the finding my voice almost came as a survival mechanism, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like do or die. Like I felt like I needed to start speaking about my experience. And at the time, my first article about motherhood was in 2016, actually, that I dared to sort of express myself publicly. And at the time, we didn't really speak much about like the other side of motherhood, you know. Everybody always spoke about what a bliss it is and how wonderful, and it is all that, but that's nothing new.
Yeah.
What I was interested in talking about is how, you know, where our conditioning sort of brings us into this almost robotic movement through life, where nobody's really connected to, or very few of us are connected to, what is it, why am I here? Like I just started really understanding that I'm here for so much more than being a wife and the mother.
Yes.
And
Yes.
although everyone was always saying, no, motherhood, oh my God, that's the most important role, I just don't feel that, you know. I still don't feel that, although I've come a full circle and I've repaired my relationships with my children now that they're, you know, grown-ups. And I've actually come to softness and understanding that my motherhood was one of the milestones on my path, which got me to where I am today.
Yeah.
I still feel that, and that's where my redefining what it means to be a woman in 21st century comes in. I just feel like we can no longer hide as women behind child rearing and how beautiful and wonderful it is.
Yeah.
Because yes, it's one of our superpowers for sure. But I view a lot of what I observe around me as parenting has become perpetuation of toxic patriarchy.
Yeah.
And I've written extensively about that as well, because it's now women themselves who police other women. You know, we police our daughters, and we police, do you know what I mean? We do the limiting, we do the imprisonment, we do the judgment and the, you know, shattering of individuality of our children. So for me, you know, I'm really, really interested in guiding women toward understanding that we're bigger than that, that yes, motherhood, yes, it has a huge importance because we're raising the future generation, you know, we're raising the future, we're directly impacting the future through the way we mother our children, but that our responsibility is so much greater than just perpetuating tradition. And, you know, that kind of heteronormative, you know, kind of just that black, white, right, wrong, very polarized thinking. And we're just repeating what was done to us, which is a kind of a normal way we do it, but it didn't work for us. Like the way we were parented didn't work for us. Why are we perpetuating that kind of parenting? And, you know, and perpetuating the toxicity of the environment, the hierarchical structure of a family where, you know, the father is number one, and then the mother maybe, and then the children are all the way below, and they're just not even the same humans. Do you know what I mean? I feel like even as a child, I remember I felt so moved and so against the fact that my parents felt that they were more important as humans than me, for example, being a child. I just felt it's just not true, you know? So yeah, so this is a lot of what I'm writing about and a lot of what I'm speaking about, because I feel that women absolutely must, number one, free ourselves, understand who we are, break out of that conditioning that has stifled us, that has disconnected us from our life force, that has disconnected us from our source of power and even capacity to love. Because we're also wounded. We're just boarded up and armored up.
Exactly. And then that's also connected to like sexuality, which has a huge part of it that I had to rediscover as well.
Absolutely. That's a huge part because, when we talk about reconnecting to our body, and that's a lot of what my work is about, we invariably have to talk about sexuality, of course, among other things, because sexuality has literally been stolen away from us, as women, and especially in these kinds of patriarchal environments like you and I were raised.
Yes.
Sexuality, it was just shameful. Meanwhile, it's part of our nature, and these processes that were happening and are still happening in our bodies, it's natural. Whereas we were raised to believe and to think and to feel that that's shameful. So we ended up hating ourselves and something that is just so natural and so normal. So for me, that is a lot of what I talk about. How can we reconnect to what's actually natural? And how can we connect, while connecting to the power, how can we change the way we treat our children, what we teach them, how we see our responsibility as mothers, and our responsibility as women? Because, coming out of patriarchy, we're also coming out of complete relational immaturity, codependence, enmeshment, that just, we keep on.
Enmeshment, that's a huge one there. Yeah, I totally enmeshed myself into every relationship I would get into, where I would just disappear. Like, oh, what do you want? What do you, I was like, what? No, I can't do that anymore.
But that's big. But, because I'm also a coach, the women that I speak to, it's like they understand intellectually, intellectually everybody understands, individual sovereignty, but we don't even know what that means. What does that mean? And when, I do, for example, teach women, take time for yourself and all, they confront such guilt and such nervous system, stressed out.
Guilt, that like so much, it's so heavy on you, because you're like, oh, but I feel guilty being out and I'm not home with the kids and they keep texting me and they're like, mommy, when are you coming home? And then you just feel guilty, like, oh, okay, I have to go because they're texting me, and it's a constant guilt. Like I always feel guilty.
Yeah. And I spend my life feeling guilty or ashamed for even having the thoughts that I was having, and I just feel like we really cannot do that anymore. We need to free ourselves from, and also understand that it's not the hovering, it's not the helicopter parenting, it's not the tiger momming that will raise healthy, resilient individuals. Not at all. On the contrary, in fact. So there's a lot of damage that we're doing to our children through the kind of parenting that, first of all, takes us away from ourselves and then takes them away from themselves. And I just feel like there is so much work to do, in this 21st century. We have so much reversal to do, with our environment, with the environment of our relationships as well, that we need to really start waking up and being in awareness and paying attention and really changing our ways.
I love it. And to tell the viewers also, if you're watching this, subscribe and help us with our algorithm, because it really helps to get it to the forefront to people who want to hear these stories. Because I feel like with my podcast, I started to realize it got bigger. Like originally it was art and hustle to like get your art out there. But then I started talking to my philosophy, like mentor English teacher from high school. And it became this bigger thing where, it's not just about art and hustle, it's about the art of living. And I feel like each story will heal. And now this is like a place where I just talk to all the giants among us and people I meet and get your stories, because I feel like everybody's stories will help somebody else and heal somebody else. So
I really love that. I also believe that. I feel like storytelling is what connects us to each other. It's not through, because it's not like prepackaged and it's not polished. So real, right? That's, I think in a way that's how, people who come to me connect to me. Like you hear my stories, you read my articles, and I often share my personal experience in the way I deliver my ideas, and it's not even an afterthought. It's just that it came naturally. Like it all started with me needing to share what I'm observing and what I'm feeling, and slowly, purely like-minded people have connected,
Yeah, exactly. And that's funny because like my teacher, he had found one recording of him teaching at the Stony Brook University, and he was teaching teachers of, how he was a teacher and his curriculum or his guideline paperwork of how he did it. And I realized the connection there naturally of what I'm doing and what he was teaching them, where like he would tell stories. And when he would tell a personal story about, Betty Lou that he was with, or his wife, he calls Nurse Ratchet sometimes. So he would give them these names. And so every time he would tell a story, he would realize that the students would lean in and be like, oh, personal story. I want to get this. And so it was beautiful to find that synchronicity and relate, to be like, wow, that's what I'm doing naturally, because I'm trying to find the answers. So when I do these podcasts, I'll have my index cards, but I'm asking questions also that I want the answers to as well. So then as they're telling stories, I tell the stories, and it's giving me this like therapy as well to try to heal some of those like wounds and generational trauma that I've accumulated all through the years also.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, I really feel that we are people who are living now, who are doing this work. I feel like we're all here to start healing. Like, I don't think we can, I just don't see the patriarchy or that kind of hierarchical, oppressive way of relating to other humans can go on. I just don't think, like, we'll end up killing each other,
Yeah,
or
I
like,
feel like the healing has to start even with kids. I realized like once I had kids, all of those things that I just pushed down got opened up, and especially when I had my daughter. She was the first one. So as soon as I had my daughter, all of those things from childhood just opened up, and like flashes of trauma would flash in, and like I'm like, oh my God, and then all the fears that you had as a kid, being imprisoned at home is how I felt it. I was in prison at home. My sexuality was taken away from me without my choice at a young age. So I was completely brainwashed as a child to not even know what's right and wrong, and fathers and mothers and all of it. So it was like hugely impactful to try to heal those wounds, but I had no idea where to go and who to go. And I've gone to see some therapists here and there throughout my life when I would get in those crisis modes, but I was never able to find one that I was able to connect with, who would understand where I was coming from. And a lot of them would just be like, well, how do you feel? Well, how do you think I feel about it? Like, I hate, like, that would be the worst thing for me when I see a therapist or a psychologist to say, how do you feel about it? Well, obviously I'm I'm angry, sad, all those feelings, but that doesn't help me unpack it. And I finally found one last year that connected to me in like more of a spiritual level, and like unpacked it and would tell me like all the other things that I needed to hear besides just this like one singular issue and problem and feeling. It was like more of a expansiveness of it, which was so much more profound.
I believe it too. Well, I mean, if anybody follows what's happening in psychiatric industry field and medical field as well, there is a lot of that, where medical doctors realize that they really weren't properly prepared to treat a human.
No, not at
Because
all.
the body was disconnected, and they were dealing with symptoms rather than the root causes. In the same way, mental health practitioners weren't taught about how it's all feeding each other, the mind, body, and then of course the spirit, that wasn't really taken away. You either had the organized religion or nothing. So I feel that there's really a big sort of movement toward holistic healing, and that's a lot of what I have, what I found in my own journey, and what I offer others is that mind, body, and spirit connection. Absolutely, one cannot exist without the other.
No, exactly. It has to be all of it. And the funny thing is, like, I always realize, like, you have to trust your gut.
Yeah.
You have to trust your gut, because you don't listen to your gut or your heart, your mind is always going to try to play tricks on you and try to talk you out of it, but really your gut is right.
Sure. Well, what is complicated about that is that when we've been conditioned, we no longer know which voice is ours. So
Yes.
it actually took me a while to understand, okay, but which, especially when our nervous system reacts, right? That's very confusing, because if the gut comes from the body, right? If like that, if the right voice comes from the body, then, you know, if my nervous system is scared, then I shouldn't be going there. Whereas sometimes we really need to go beyond that fear in order to break out. So it's a confusing process, and it's going to take us a while, I think, to normalize it. But there's more and more people, I think, available who have, you know, who are sharing their stories and offering what has helped them to offer.
And the thing I want to tell people is that when I first text you, I'm like, oh my God, I want to talk to you about your book. And you're like, I haven't written one yet. And I'm like, you need to.
You know, what's really funny is that I guess for me, even calling myself a writer was such a like not planned thing. Like I never thought of myself a writer.
Yeah.
I obviously now today I can say, you know, without false timidity, that I obviously have a gift. You know, I never took a writing class in my life. So the way these words come to me and the way I'm able to present them, there is something. And I'm actually convinced that the gifts that we've come here with these gifts to help us become who it is that we're meant to become here. So, you know, I discovered this voice just like you discovered your art. It's not random, you know, it's not random. I feel like it's here for a specific reason, and so
it wants to come out.
And it wants to come out, and that's how it started with me. You know, I just needed to start expressing. I didn't care what form. I just like I felt like I needed it for me. That was my healing modality, you know. And then a lot of people started reaching out, you know, about where's your book, and I'm like, I don't like, first of all, I have no idea how to even start, you know.
Well, you know what I think, since like listening to you from the beginning, you have this beautiful way of articulating in your words. It's also almost poetic, and I feel like most books I like to listen to is audio books.
Right.
So I think it would be beautiful for you to write your book as an audio one first and just dictate it.
Wow.
And just dictate it and just speak, even as you speak to other people, even if you're doing this podcast, once you listen to it again, everything that you saying in it is perfectly as an audiobook.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's such an interesting idea. I mean, you know, what I love about what you just said is, and this has been my journey really in the last 10 years, because I feel like life is always showing me, now that I'm aligned with where I'm supposed to be going, right? There's always that, like, the next step is given to me, right? Like, I don't need to worry. I don't need to fight for it or like look for it with the lantern. Like, it's always given to me. Just like the way I started coaching, you know, most of my clients are online and it's global. And, you know, even 2.5 years ago, we didn't even know what Zoom was. At least I don't think it existed. So I just feel like everything is happening now, and all the newness is here to help us get to where we're going. So, I mean, what a crazy idea is that, to write a book as to start with it being an audio.
Yes, and I see. The beautiful thing is, like, I naturally have this instinctive I don't know, gut feelings and things. As I meet people and like talk to them, I just naturally will see like their gifts. And yes, so as soon as you started speaking, and as soon as I saw some of your Instagram and stories, I was like, you have to have a book. But obviously, like, I'm like you, where I'm more intuitive of, like, for me, I'm not a writer, so I do want to write my book, but I'm not a writer, and I'm not good with, like, you know, grammatical and all of that stuff, so I never see myself as a writer. So as I tell everybody in my podcast, I'm talking, I'm like, I want to write a story about my childhood and, you know, death and rediscovering and sexuality and finding my voice. I realized, you know what, I really should just make it more of an art book. because really that's who I am. So why am I struggling to try to put myself into a box of like just words? It'll be art, poetry, essays, and words. So it'll be all encompassing because that's who I am. I'm not just words. It would have to be my art, which is me.
I love that so much. I really do believe in that as well. I feel that we need to start taking up more space and sort of disrupt the familiar ways we express ourselves. I think that's what's happening.
So I think like when you do your Zooms and you're coaching with people, I'm not sure if you record them, but if you record them, that's your audiobook. Like all of your advice that you're giving to people can be a culmination of your advices and your sessions, and it could be just like art. I love doing collage art. So you could be having like, if you wanted to start it or bring some that way, we just collect all the things that you said, because really your words are beautiful. How you speak is so poetic also, and I really appreciate you being here, and I really hope we can do this again, because I feel like you're my soul sister now and we have to do more of these.
Anytime, because as you see, I love talking. so yeah, and especially on these subjects, because I get like that's what's exciting to me.
I love it, and we definitely have to do more of these. We'll pick a topic. I mean, there's endless topics of things that we have to heal and talk about. So we definitely need to pick one, and we'll just come on and chat. And I really, really appreciate you. We'll definitely do this again.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes. Bye-bye.
I did. Then it went into like finally getting back to me, my art. All I want to do is art. And the other thing is that I love stories. So like to me, art is in everything. Your art is your voice, your speaking, your connection. You can feel everyone's energy. That's your art. It's the art of living to me. So art and hustle to me is the art of living, and art of it and everything.
I hope that you cut that piece right there and make it your intro and your outro, because that was dope.